The billionaire pretended to sleep, and the maid's daughter drew on his face. Alexander Hart had everything money could buy, yet he possessed nothing that truly mattered. At 34, he stood atop a corporate empire that stretched across 3 continents, lived in a mansion that resembled a modern museum, and wore suits that cost more than most people's monthly salaries. But success, he discovered, was a lonely companion. The grandfather clock in the marble foyer struck 9 as Alexander pushed through the heavy oak doors of his estate. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the pristine floors with mechanical precision, the only sound in a home designed to impress, not to live in. The silence wrapped around him like a familiar stranger, cold and unwelcome. "Welcome home, Mr. Hart," came the soft voice of Elena Martinez, his housekeeper. She emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, her warm brown eyes filled with the gentle concern she tried to hide. Elena had worked for Alexander for nearly 2 years, and in that time, she'd watched the young billionaire retreat further into himself with each passing month. "Thank you, Elena," Alexander replied without looking at her, his voice flat with exhaustion. He loosened his navy tie and headed toward the living room, his shoulders hunched under invisible weight. "You can leave early tonight. I'll manage." Elena hesitated, clutching the dish towel in her hands. At 28, she'd learned to read people, a survival skill developed through years of single motherhood and humble work. She saw past Alexander's expensive facade to the loneliness that ate at him from within. "Mr. Hart, I made your favorite." "I'm not hungry," he interrupted, not unkindly, but with the finality of someone who'd long ago stopped expecting comfort from food or company or anything else life offered. He collapsed onto the leather sofa in the living room, a space decorated by an award-winning interior designer who'd clearly never considered that someone might actually want to relax there. The furniture was beautiful and uncomfortable in equal measure. Alexander didn't bother removing his shoes or heading upstairs to his bedroom. What was the point? Sleep was sleep, whether in a $1,000 bed or on this pretentious couch. He closed his eyes, not really sleeping but not quite awake either, that liminal space he'd come to occupy more and more frequently. His mind churned with tomorrow's meetings, next quarter's projections, the acquisition deal that was taking too long to close. Numbers and strategies, and the endless pursuit of more. In the kitchen, Elena glanced at the clock, then at the small makeshift bed she'd created in the corner of the staff quarters. Her daughter, Lily, was supposed to be napping there, but the blankets were empty, rumpled where a small body had been moments before. Elena's heart jumped. Lily was a curious child, sweet and innocent, but also prone to wandering when something caught her interest. At 3 years old, she didn't understand boundaries or that Mr. Hart preferred his solitude, his perfectly ordered world undisturbed by sticky fingers or childish laughter. "Lily?" Elena called softly, trying not to disturb Mr. Hart. She checked the pantry, the dining room, the hallway. Panic began to flutter in her chest like a trapped bird. She'd been so careful to keep Lily out of Mr. Hart's way. He'd been gracious enough to allow her to bring her daughter to work when her regular babysitter fell through, but Elena knew his tolerance was conditional on invisibility. The mansion was too large, too full of expensive things that could break, too filled with a coldness that might swallow up a warm, laughing child. Elena quickened her pace, calling a little louder now. "Lily, baby, where are you?" She didn't know that at that very moment, her daughter stood in the doorway of the living room, her wild dark curls framing her cherubic face, clutching her favorite box of crayons, the 8-count variety that came from the dollar store, their colors already worn down from enthusiastic use. Lily's brown eyes, so like her mother's, but filled with the untarnished wonder of childhood, studied the man on the sofa. She'd seen him before, of course, during those fleeting moments when Mama was cleaning and she was supposed to stay quiet and invisible. But she'd never seen him like this, so still and peaceful, his usually stern face softened by something that looked almost like sleep. She tiptoed closer, her small feet silent on the carpet, and tilted her head to examine him more carefully. Mr. Hart, or Uncle as she'd privately dubbed him, always looked so serious, so sad. Even when she'd peek around corners and catch glimpses of him, his face wore an expression that reminded her of the rain clouds that sometimes covered the sun. But now, lying there with his eyes closed, he looked different. Younger somehow, less scary. And Lily, with the uncomplicated logic of a 3-year-old, knew exactly what he needed. She whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. "Uncle's sleeping. I make him happy face." Her fingers found the yellow crayon first, the color of sunshine and happiness and all good things. She approached the sofa with the reverence of an artist approaching a blank canvas, completely unaware that what she was about to do would change not just her life, but the life of the lonely man before her. Alexander, in his half-conscious state, sensed a presence. Some part of his mind registered movement, the soft breathing of another person nearby, but he remained still. Let Elena finish whatever she was doing and leave him to his thoughts. He was too tired to care, too drained to open his eyes and face another moment of his carefully constructed, utterly hollow existence. What he didn't know was that in the next few moments, a 3-year-old girl with crayons and a pure heart was about to add color to his gray world, literally and figuratively, in a way that no business deal, no amount of money, and no achievement ever could. Lily's tiny hand trembled slightly as she reached toward Alexander's face with her yellow crayon. She'd drawn on paper countless times, on the backs of her mother's grocery lists, on the cardboard boxes they'd saved for moving to their small apartment, on every scrap her mama could spare. But she'd never had a canvas quite like this. She started gently, almost reverently, drawing a curved line that began at one side of his mouth and swooped upward toward his ear. The waxy crayon glided smoothly across his skin, leaving a trail of sunshine yellow behind. She smiled, satisfied with her work, and switched to her red crayon. "Need happy cheeks," she whispered to herself, her voice full of the serious concentration that children bring to their most important work. She colored a wobbly circle on his right cheek, pressing just hard enough to leave a mark but gentle enough not to wake him, or so she thought. Alexander felt it, the soft pressure, the waxy texture, the deliberate strokes across his face. For a moment, confusion clouded his semi-conscious mind. Was he dreaming? Having some kind of stress-induced hallucination? But the sensation was too real, too present, too utterly bizarre to be anything but reality. He remained perfectly still, his business instincts kicking in even in this absurd situation. Assess before acting. Understand before reacting. His mind raced through possibilities. Elena would never. Could this be some elaborate prank? But who would dare? Then he heard it, the softest giggle, quickly suppressed, followed by the whispered words. "Other side too. Must be same. A child." There was a child drawing on his face. The realization was so unexpected, so utterly foreign to anything Alexander had experienced in his carefully controlled adult life, that he almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he maintained his stillness, curiosity now replacing confusion. How long had it been since anyone had dared touch him without permission? His dates were carefully vetted, his handshakes firm and brief, his personal space an invisible fortress. And now someone, some small someone, was coloring on his face as if he were a page in a coloring book. Lily switched to pink, creating rosy cheeks that matched her vision of happiness. Then came the blue for his eyelids. "Like sky," she murmured, though she was careful not to poke his actual eyes. She'd learned from experience that eyes didn't like crayons. "Need flower," she decided, selecting her purple crayon. Flowers make everyone smile. She drew a simple bloom on his forehead, the kind of flower that exists only in children's drawings, a circle center with petals radiating outward in imperfect symmetry. To her it was beautiful. To her it was exactly what Uncle needed. "There," she said, stepping back to admire her work. "Now you pretty and happy." It was at this moment that Elena entered the living room, her worry having escalated to near panic. She'd searched half the mansion, her calls for Lily growing more desperate with each empty room. And now, finally finding her daughter, the relief lasted exactly 1 second before transforming into absolute horror. "Lily." The name came out strangled, caught between a whisper and a shriek. "What have you done?" Elena's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock as she took in the scene before her. Her employer, the powerful Alexander Hart, lying on his expensive sofa with his face decorated like a carnival mask. Yellow smiles, red and pink circles, blue eyelids, and, dear God, was that a purple flower on his forehead? No, 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 no. Elena breathed, rushing forward. "Lily, baby, stop. Mr. Hart will be so angry. We'll lose our home. We'll." She reached for her daughter, but Lily danced away, still clutching her crayons, her face crumpling into confusion. "But Mama, I make Uncle happy. See? He has smile now." "That's not, you can't." Elena's voice cracked. She'd worked so hard to keep this job, to provide stability for Lily after her ex-husband had abandoned them both. This position came with decent pay, with health insurance, with the tiny staff apartment where they lived. And now, in one moment of childish innocence, it was all about to crumble. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Hart," Elena began, her words tumbling over each other in her panic. She didn't mean any harm. She's just 3. She doesn't understand. "Please, I'll clean it right away, Am I a cartoon now?" The deep voice cut through Elena's frantic apologies, freezing her mid-sentence. Alexander opened one eye, the one without blue crayon on its lid, and looked directly at Lily. His expression was unreadable, his face a bizarre combination of executive sternness and crayon-bright cheerfulness. The room fell silent. Elena held her breath. Lily's eyes went wide. Then Alexander opened both eyes and sat up slowly, carefully, as if afraid sudden movement might smudge the artwork. He reached up to touch his face, his fingers coming away with traces of yellow and red and pink and blue and purple. Elena tried again, but words failed her. She watched her employer stand and walk to the ornate mirror that hung above the fireplace. Her hands gripped Lily's shoulders. Whether to comfort her daughter or restrain her, she couldn't say. Alexander stood before his reflection, staring at the stranger looking back at him. Garish yellow smile, clown-like rosy cheeks, blue eyeshadow that would make a drag queen proud. And topping it all off, a purple flower positioned perfectly in the center of his forehead, like some kind of bizarre blessing. He looked ridiculous. Absolutely, completely, utterly ridiculous. The laugh started small, somewhere deep in his chest, a place that had been cold and tight for so long he'd forgotten it could feel anything else. It bubbled up, unfamiliar and unstoppable, breaking through years of practiced control and professional composure. He laughed. Not the polite chuckle he gave at business dinners or the rehearsed response to a client's joke. This was real laughter, the kind that came from somewhere genuine and surprised him with its intensity. It shook his shoulders, crinkled his eyes, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, reached his heart. Elena stood frozen, her arms wrapped protectively around Lily, unable to process what she was witnessing. Alexander Hart, the man who once fired an assistant for bringing him the wrong brand of coffee, who demanded perfection in all things, whose legendary temper had been whispered about in boardrooms across the city, was laughing. Not just laughing, but bent over, hands on his knees, laughing so hard that tears were forming in his eyes, smudging the blue crayon on his lids. "Mr. Hart," Elena ventured, her voice small with uncertainty. Alexander straightened, wiping his eyes carefully to avoid disturbing more of the artwork. When he turned to face them, his expression had transformed. The harsh lines that usually bracketed his mouth had softened. His eyes, typically cold as winter frost, now held warmth that made him look almost like a different person entirely. "I look like a Picasso painting had a collision with a birthday party," he said, his voice still threaded with amusement. He looked down at Lily, who had been watching him with wide, uncertain eyes. "What do you think, little artist? Did I need all these improvements?" Lily studied him seriously, her small fingers still clutching her crayons like precious treasures. She tilted her head, considering her work with the gravity of a master painter reviewing their masterpiece. "Yes," she declared, her voice gaining confidence. "Now you look happy, Uncle. Before you looked like—" She paused, searching for the right words with the limited vocabulary of childhood, like when Mama cries at night.
Sad face.
But now, happy face. This simple observation hit Alexander like a physical blow. This child, this tiny human being who barely knew him, had seen what everyone else in his life had either missed or chosen to ignore. His sadness. His isolation. The wall he'd built between himself and the world. Elena's intake of breath was sharp.
Lily.
That's not appropriate. Mr. Hart, I apologize for.
No.
Alexander held up his hand, still decorated with purple flower petals. She's right. Completely right. He walked back to the sofa and sat down, patting the space next to him, an invitation that shocked Elena even more than the laughter had. Come here, Lily. Tell me about your drawing. Lily looked up at her mother, seeking permission. Elena nodded numbly, still trying to understand this shift in reality. Her daughter skipped over to the sofa and climbed up beside Alexander, her small legs sticking straight out over the edge, her scuffed sneakers with the cartoon characters on them a stark contrast to his $1,000 suit. This is Smile, Lily explained, pointing to the yellow curve. Because smiles are sunshine. And these, she indicated the pink circles, are happy cheeks. Like when Mama makes cookies and we eat them warm. Your face gets warm and pink when you're happy. Alexander listened, genuinely listened, in a way he hadn't listened to anyone in years. In business meetings, he was always 3 steps ahead, anticipating arguments, planning counter-strategies. But now, he simply heard this child's words, her simple logic, her pure intention. And the flower? He asked, touching his forehead gently. Flowers grow in sunshine, Lily said matter-of-factly. If you have sunshine smile, you need flower too. Is science, she concluded, using a word she'd clearly learned recently and was proud to deploy. This time Alexander's laugh was softer, tinged with something that felt dangerously close to emotion. When was the last time someone had wanted to make him happy? Not to please him for professional gain or to manipulate him for personal advantage, but simply because they thought he deserved happiness? He couldn't remember. Mr. Hart, Elena began again, finding her voice though it trembled slightly. Please let me clean your face. And I promise, Lily will never bother you again. I'll make sure she stays in the staff quarters when you're home. This was completely unacceptable, and… Elena. Alexander turned to face her, and she saw something in his expression that she'd never witnessed before. Vulnerability. When I came home tonight, I don't even know what I was. Tired doesn't begin to cover it. I've spent the last 6 months closing a deal that made me wealthier than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I should feel accomplished. Triumphant. Something. But all I felt was empty. He glanced down at Lily, who was now examining her crayons, deciding which color she might use next if given the opportunity. And then this little person decided I needed a makeover, and for the first time in I don't know how long, I actually felt something.
Joy. Surprise.
The absurdity of it all. Elena's eyes began to well with tears, relief, gratitude, confusion all mixing together. I don't understand. Neither do I, Alexander admitted. But I'm tired of understanding everything, of controlling everything, of being so damned responsible and serious all the time. He stood and walked back to the mirror, studying his rainbow-colored reflection. How do you remove crayon from skin anyway? Warm water and soap, usually, Elena said automatically, her housekeeper instincts overriding her shock. And maybe some baby oil for the stubborn bits. Perfect. Alexander headed toward the hallway, then paused. Lily, would you like to help me wash this off? And then, if it's okay with your mother, maybe you could show me what else you like to draw? On paper this time. Lily's face lit up like a Christmas tree. She scrambled off the sofa and grabbed Alexander's hand with complete trust, her tiny fingers wrapping around 2 of his larger ones. I draw lots of things. I draw Mama and flowers and our cat. We don't have cat, but I draw him anyway. His name is Mr. Whiskers. As Elena watched her daughter lead the powerful billionaire down the hallway, chattering away about an imaginary cat, she felt as if she'd stepped into some alternate universe. This wasn't the Mr. Hart she knew. This wasn't the cold, distant employer who communicated primarily through brief instructions and rare acknowledgments. She followed them to the guest bathroom, where Alexander was already running warm water. Lily had climbed onto the counter, with his help, and was now instructing him on the proper way to wash faces. "You must be gentle," she explained seriously, "or it hurts the skin. Mama taught me." "Your mama is very wise," Alexander said, meeting Elena's eyes in the mirror. There was a question there, or perhaps an apology, or maybe just recognition, acknowledgement that he'd been so absorbed in his own world that he'd never really seen the people who kept his life running smoothly. Elena found herself smiling despite the emotional whiplash of the last 15 minutes. "She also taught you not to draw on people, if I recall correctly." Lily had the grace to look slightly sheepish. "I forgot that part." "Convenient memory," Elena murmured, but there was no real anger in her voice. How could she be angry when the result had been so unexpectedly positive? As Alexander gently washed the crayon from his face, Lily providing running commentary on his technique, something shifted in the enormous house. The silence that usually pressed down like a weight seemed to lift slightly. Laughter echoed off the marble floors. For the first time since its construction, the mansion felt almost like a home. The next morning, Alexander did something he hadn't done in 5 years. He called his office and told them he'd be late. Not delayed by traffic or a meeting running over. Actually, intentionally late. His assistant stammered so badly in response that Alexander almost laughed again, that unfamiliar sensation from the night before returning with surprising ease. He'd barely slept, but for once, it wasn't anxiety or stress that kept him awake. His mind kept returning to the simple joy in Lily's eyes, to Elena's protective love for her daughter, to the realization that somewhere along his climb to success, he'd forgotten what it felt like to be human. At 9 o'clock, instead of being in his corner office reviewing reports, Alexander found himself in his car, driving to the upscale shopping district. He parked in front of an art supply store he'd passed 1,000 times, but never entered. The bell chimed as he walked in, and an elderly woman behind the counter looked up with a welcoming smile. "Can I help you find something?" "I need art supplies," Alexander said, then realized how vague that sounded. "For a 3-year-old girl. She likes to draw." The woman's face lit up with understanding. "Granddaughter?" "No, Alexander paused. What was Lily to him? His housekeeper's daughter seemed too formal, too distant for what he was feeling. "She's a friend. A small friend who reminded me yesterday that life should have more color in it." 20 minutes later, Alexander loaded his car with packages, a deluxe crayon set with 120 colors, washable markers, watercolor paints, sketchbooks ranging from small to enormous, colored pencils, pastels, and an easel sized perfectly for a child. The salesperson had recommended it all, and Alexander, who normally negotiated every detail of every transaction, simply agreed to everything. He returned to the mansion to find Elena in the kitchen, preparing his breakfast as usual. She looked up in surprise when he entered through the back door, his arms full of packages. "Mr. Hart, I didn't expect you home. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," he assured her, setting the packages on the kitchen table. "I brought something for Lily. Is she awake?" Elena's expression shifted through confusion, concern, and finally settled on cautious curiosity. "She's watching cartoons in the sitting room." "Mr. Hart, you didn't need to." "I know I didn't need to," Alexander interrupted gently. "I wanted to. She made me laugh yesterday. Do you know how rare that is? How precious?" Elena's eyes grew shiny with emotion. She wiped her hands on her apron, a gesture Alexander now recognized as her way of steadying herself. "Mr. Hart, I need to apologize again for." "Please don't." Alexander pulled out a chair and sat down at the kitchen table, another first. He'd never sat in his own kitchen before. "Elena, may I ask you something personal?" She nodded, looking uncertain. "Why do you do this job? I'm sure you could work somewhere with better hours, maybe somewhere that paid more." Elena sat down across from him, her movements careful as if she were approaching a skittish animal. "The pay is good, Mr. Hart. And this position comes with housing, which in this city, well, you know how expensive it is." For a single mother, that security means everything. Single mother, Alexander repeated. Lily's father? Gone before she was born, Elena said simply, her voice carrying the weight of an old pain that had scarred over, but never quite healed. He decided fatherhood wasn't part of his life plan. It's been just us since then. Alexander thought about his own father, distant, demanding, never satisfied. He'd built his empire partly to prove something to a man who died before Alexander could earn his approval. That must be incredibly difficult. It is, Elena admitted. But Lily makes it worth it. Every struggle, every sacrifice, when I see her smile, when I hear her laugh, I know I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. She's lucky to have you. I'm the lucky one, Mr. Hart. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the morning light streaming through the kitchen windows, illuminating the art supplies on the table between them. I've been thinking, Alexander said slowly, choosing his words carefully. This house is too big for one person. Too quiet. Too empty. And you're cramped in those staff quarters with a growing child who needs space to be a child. Elena's expression became guarded. Mr. Hart, if this is about yesterday, it's about me realizing that I've built a fortress instead of a home, Alexander continued. I have 12 bedrooms in this house. 12. And I use one. There's a playroom that's never seen a child, a library full of books I've never read, a garden that could use a child's laughter. What are you saying? Elena asked carefully. I'm saying that I'd like to offer you and Lily better accommodations. The guest house out back, it has 3 bedrooms, a full kitchen, a living room. It's sitting empty. You could live there, have your own space, and Lily could have a room of her own. A place to display all the art she's going to create with these supplies. Elena's hand flew to her mouth. Mr. Hart, I can't possibly. That's too much. It's not enough, Alexander said firmly. Elena, you've worked for me for 2 years. You keep this entire estate running. You prepare meals I rarely eat, maintain rooms I never enter, and you do it all while raising a daughter alone. The least I can do is provide you with a proper home. But what would you want in return? Elena asked, and Alexander heard the wariness there, the learned caution of someone who'd been let down before. Nothing, he said simply. Just, maybe sometimes Lily could teach me about colors and drawing, and how to see the world the way she does. And maybe we could all eat dinner together occasionally. This table is too big for one person. Elena's tears spilled over then, and she didn't bother wiping them away. Why are you doing this? Alexander thought about the question. He could give her the practical answer, that happy employees were productive employees, that it was simply good management. But that wasn't the truth, and for once, he wanted to be honest. Because yesterday, a 3-year-old girl saw me more clearly than anyone has in years. She saw that I was sad, and instead of ignoring it or exploiting it or pretending she didn't notice, she tried to make me happy. With crayons. It was the purest act of kindness I've experienced in longer than I can remember. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I've spent my entire adult life building wealth and power and success. I've acquired companies, made billions, earned respect in boardrooms around the world. But I can't remember the last time someone tried to make me smile just because they thought I deserved to be happy. Your daughter gave me that gift. Let me give her something in return. Before Elena could respond, Lily burst into the kitchen, her wild curls bouncing with each step. Mama. Uncle. The cartoons are over and I'm hungry and OH. She stopped short, seeing the packages on the table. What's all that? Lily, say good morning properly. Elena gently corrected, but she was smiling through her tears.
Good morning, Mama. Good morning, Uncle.
Lily's eyes never left the packages. Is it someone's birthday? Actually, Alexander said, sliding off his chair to kneel at her level. These are for you. A thank you gift for the beautiful art you created yesterday. Lily's eyes went impossibly wide. For me? All for me? All for you, Alexander confirmed. Would you like to see? The next 15 minutes were a whirlwind of torn paper, excited squeals, and rapid-fire questions. Lily couldn't believe the 120 crayon set. There's silver. And gold. And Mama, what color is this? Was enchanted by the watercolors. Can I paint Mr. Whiskers now? And absolutely delighted by the easel. Like real artist. Like on TV. Elena watched her daughter's joy with tears streaming down her face, and Alexander watched them both, feeling something crack open in his chest, something that had been locked away so long he'd forgotten it existed. Uncle, Lily said suddenly, looking up from her new treasures with serious eyes. Do you know what these need? What's that? They need pictures. Lots and lots of pictures. She grabbed his hand. Come, I show you how to make happy flowers. And so Alexander Hart, Billionaire CEO, found himself sitting cross-legged on his kitchen floor with a 3-year-old girl, learning how to draw flowers and clouds and cats named Mr. Whiskers. His $1,000 suit got smudged with paint. His carefully styled hair fell into his eyes. His watch, worth more than some cars, got splattered with watercolor. He'd never been happier in his life. Over the following weeks, the Hart Mansion underwent a transformation that no amount of money or professional designers had been able to achieve. It started small, Lily's artwork appearing on the refrigerator in the kitchen, held up by magnets Alexander had purchased specifically for that purpose. Then a drawing made its way to his home office, taped to the wall beside his computer monitors, a splash of childish color against the austere gray and black. Elena and Lily moved into the guest house, which took some convincing on Elena's part. She'd been hesitant, worried about accepting too much, about the inevitable complications that came with kindness. But Alexander had been insistent and, more importantly, genuine. There was no ulterior motive in his eyes, no hidden agenda in his words, just a lonely man trying to fill his empty house with something that resembled life. The first dinner they shared in the main house was awkward. Elena kept jumping up to serve, unable to shake her role as employee. Alexander kept attempting formal dinner conversation, falling back on business topics before remembering he was talking to a 3-year-old and a woman who had no interest in quarterly earnings reports. It was Lily who broke the tension, as she seemed to break through most of Alexander's carefully constructed walls. Uncle, why you eat chicken with so many forks? She asked, staring at his place setting with obvious confusion. Alexander looked down at his formal dining arrangement. He'd had Elena set the table the way he'd learned growing up, with multiple forks and knives and spoons for different courses. That's how you're supposed to eat. But you only got one mouth, Lily pointed out with irrefutable logic. One fork should work, right? Elena had tried to suppress her smile. Alexander had stared at his elaborate place setting for a long moment before bursting into laughter and sweeping half the silverware aside. You're absolutely right. One fork is plenty. From that night on, dinners became simpler, less formal, more real. Alexander found himself looking forward to 6 o'clock each evening when Elena would bring dinner to the main house and they'd eat together in the kitchen. That kitchen he'd never used before, now the warmest room in the mansion. Lily would chatter about her day, about the butterflies she'd seen in the garden, about the story Elena had read her, about Mr. Whiskers' latest imaginary adventures. Mr. Whiskers went to the moon today, she announced one evening, her face serious as she explained. He needed to get moon cheese for his moon mouse friends. That's very thoughtful of him, Alexander said, and he meant it. He was learning to enter Lily's world, to see the logic in her imagination, to remember what it was like when everything was still possible and magic was just part of daily life. Uncle, do you have friends? Lily asked one day, the question coming out of nowhere as children's questions often did. Alexander paused in his drawing. He'd taken to joining Lily's art sessions in the evenings, finding the simple act of putting crayon to paper surprisingly therapeutic. I have business associates. That's not what I asked, Lily said, her 3-year-old wisdom cutting straight to the truth. Elena looked up from the dishes she was washing, concern in her eyes. Lily, that's a personal question. It's okay, Alexander said quietly. He put down his crayon and looked at the little girl beside him.
No, Lily.
I don't really have friends. Not real ones. Why not? I'm not sure. I've been so busy with work, I suppose I forgot to make time for people. Lily considered this with the gravity of a philosopher. That's silly. Work is just work. People are important. You're very smart, you know that? Mama says I'm smart and beautiful and kind, Lily recited, clearly repeating something she'd heard often. She says those are the things that matter. Alexander looked at Elena, who had turned back to the dishes, her shoulders tense. He wondered how many times she'd told her daughter those things, building her up, trying to shield her from a world that could be cruel and dismissive, trying to give her the confidence that Elena herself might not always feel. Your mama is very wise, Alexander said. And she's right. You are smart and beautiful and kind. That night, after Lily had been put to bed in the guest house, Elena returned to the main house to finish cleaning up. She found Alexander still in the kitchen, staring at the drawing Lily had made for him. Another flower, this one with a smiling face in the center. She adores you, Elena said softly, making Alexander jump. He hadn't heard her come in. The feeling is mutual, Alexander admitted. I never imagined that having people around could be so exhausting, Elena suggested with a gentle smile. I was going to say wonderful, Alexander corrected. But yes, also exhausting. How do you do it every day? The questions, the energy, the constant needs. Elena sat down across from him, her movements weary after a long day. Love makes it easier. When you love someone, taking care of them doesn't feel like a burden. It feels like a privilege. I've never thought about it that way. That's because you've spent most of your life taking care of yourself, I think, Elena said, and there was no judgment in her voice, just observation. There's nothing wrong with that, Mr. Hart. You've accomplished amazing things. Alexander, he said suddenly. Please call me Alexander. We've been eating dinner together for 3 weeks now. Mr. Hart feels too formal. Elena smiled. Alexander, then. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Alexander spoke again. I've been thinking about what Lily said. About friends. About work just being work. She has a way of cutting through the nonsense, doesn't she? She does. Alexander turned the drawing over in his hands. I built this empire thinking it would make me happy. Thinking success would fill whatever was missing inside me. But I have more money than I could spend in 5 lifetimes, and until a 3-year-old drew on my face with crayons, I couldn't remember the last time I actually felt joy. What are you going to do about it? Elena asked. I don't know, Alexander admitted. I'm not sure I know how to change. How to be different than I've been. Maybe you don't need to change everything, Elena suggested. Maybe you just need to make room for more. More laughter, more color, more life. Alexander finished. Exactly. Over the next several weeks, Alexander began making small adjustments. He started leaving the office at 6 instead of 9, rushing home for dinner with Elena and Lily. He hired an additional assistant and delegated more, realizing that the company wouldn't collapse if he wasn't personally involved in every decision. He cleared out one of the mansion's unused rooms and turned it into an art studio for Lily, complete with washable paint on the walls so she could create murals if she wanted. Her face when she saw it, that pure, unbridled joy, was worth more than any business deal he'd ever closed. He started reading the books in his library, often with Lily curled up beside him, asking questions about the pictures or making up her own stories based on the covers. He discovered he enjoyed fiction, something he'd dismissed as frivolous for most of his adult life. He even got a cat, a real one, not imaginary. Lily named him Mr. Whiskers, of course, and the orange tabby quickly became a fixture in the mansion, curling up on Alexander's laptop during video calls, much to his colleagues' surprise. Is that a cat? One of his board members asked during a quarterly review. Yes, Alexander said simply, not bothering to explain. Now, about the expansion into the Asian market. But perhaps the biggest change was internal. Alexander found himself smiling more, laughing easier, approaching life with less rigid control and more openness to possibility. The walls he'd built, around his heart, around his home, around his life, were slowly crumbling, brick by brick. And he was letting them fall. 6 months after Lily had drawn on his face with crayons, Alexander stood in his office on the top floor of Hart Enterprises, looking out over the city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, colors he'd learned the names of from a 3-year-old with an artist's eye. His phone buzzed with a text from Elena. Dinner at 6:30. Lily made dessert, with supervision. Don't be late. He smiled and typed back. Wouldn't miss it. There was a knock on his office door, and his assistant poked her head in. Mr. Hart? The Tokyo office is online too, and the lawyers need you to review. Tell Tokyo I'll call them in the morning their time, Alexander interrupted, already packing his briefcase. And send the contracts to my email. I'll review them tonight. His assistant blinked in surprise. Even after months of this new schedule, she still seemed shocked each time he left at a reasonable hour. Yes, sir. Oh, and Mr. Hart? Your mother called again. She wants to know if you're coming to the charity gala next month. Alexander paused. His mother. Another relationship he'd let atrophy over the years, reduced to obligatory holiday dinners and brief phone calls. Tell her yes. And ask if I can bring guests. Guests, sir?
Yes.
2 guests. He smiled, already imagining Lily's excitement at a fancy party, Elena's protests that it was too much. A very wise 3-year-old and her wonderful mother. The drive home. He'd started thinking of the mansion as home now, not just the house. Took 40 minutes through rush-hour traffic. Alexander used the time to call his mother himself, something he hadn't done in months. Alexander? His mother's surprised voice came through the speakers. Is everything all right? Everything's fine, Mom. Better than fine, actually. I wanted to tell you I'll be at the gala. And I'm bringing some people I'd like you to meet. People? Are you seeing someone? Alexander smiled at the hope in her voice. His mother had been trying to set him up for years, worried about his solitary life. It's not what you think. But yes, there are people in my life now. Important people. He told her about Elena and Lily, about the crayon incident, about how a child's innocent gesture had somehow unlocked something in him that years of therapy and self-help books never could. His mother listened, and when he finished, her voice was thick with emotion. I'd love to meet them, Alexander. I've been so worried about you alone in that big house. I'm not alone anymore, Alexander said, and realized with a start that it was true. The mansion that had once echoed with silence now rang with laughter and music and the patting of small feet and the soft meows of an orange cat named after an imaginary friend. When he arrived home, Lily was waiting by the front door, bouncing with excitement. At 3.5 now, she'd grown taller, more articulate, but no less enthusiastic about life. Uncle Alexander. Uncle Alexander. I made cupcakes. Well, Mama made cupcakes, but I did the decorating. She grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the kitchen, chattering nonstop about the careful application of frosting and sprinkles. The kitchen was a disaster. Flour on the counters, frosting smeared on the floor, sprinkles scattered like confetti. And in the center of it all stood Elena, laughing as she tried to clean Mr. Whiskers, who had apparently walked through a puddle of pink frosting. I'm so sorry, Elena said when she saw Alexander. We were going to clean up before you got home, but someone, she looked pointedly at Lily, decided Mr. Whiskers needed to help taste test, and... It's perfect, Alexander interrupted, and he meant it. The mess, the chaos, the laughter, it was all perfect. They ate dinner together, Lily's slightly lopsided cupcakes served for dessert with great ceremony. Afterward, as Elena gave Lily a bath in the guest house, Alexander found himself tidying the kitchen, something he'd never done before Elena and Lily had come into his life.
He didn't mind.
There was something meditative about the simple task, something grounding. Later, after Lily had been tucked into bed, Elena returned to find Alexander in his office, not working on his laptop, but sketching with colored pencils. She paused in the doorway, watching him with a soft expression. What are you drawing? She asked finally. Alexander looked up, slightly embarrassed at being caught.
A garden.
Lily said we should put a garden in the back, with flowers that butterflies like. I'm trying to design it. Elena moved closer, looking at the sketch. It was surprisingly good. Alexander had taken to art with unexpected dedication, practicing with Lily during their evening sessions. The garden he'd drawn was whimsical and beautiful, clearly influenced by a child's imagination but executed with adult skill. "She'll love it," Elena said softly. "I hope so." Alexander set down his pencil and looked at Elena, really looked at her. Over the past months, he'd come to appreciate not just her skill as a housekeeper, but her strength as a mother, her kindness as a person, her quiet wisdom that had guided him through his transformation. "Elena, I need to say something." She sat down across from him, her expression curious but guarded. "When you first came to work for me, I barely noticed you," Alexander began. "You were just staff. Someone who kept my house running while I focused on things I thought were important. And I'm ashamed of that now." "Alexander, you don't need to. Please let me finish." He took a breath. "You and Lily have changed my life in ways I'm still trying to understand. This house isn't a museum anymore. It's a home. And I'm not just going through the motions of life. I'm actually living it." Elena's eyes were shining with unshed tears. "Lily adores you. You've given her a father figure, stability, opportunities one never could have provided on my own." "She's given me far more," Alexander said. "She's given me perspective.
Joy.
A reason to leave the office at a reasonable hour." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I don't want this to change, Elena. I don't want you to feel like you have to leave, or that this arrangement is temporary." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I'd like you and Lily to stay.
Permanently.
Not as my employee and her daughter, but as family, I suppose. You've become my family." Elena's tears spilled over then. "Alexander, we're not actually. I know we're not blood-related. But family isn't just about blood, is it? It's about the people who make life worth living. The people who see you at your worst and stick around anyway. The people who draw on your face with crayons and somehow make everything better." Elena laughed through her tears. "She's never going to live that down, is she?" "Not a chance." Alexander smiled. "So, what do you say? Will you stay?" "Yes," Elena whispered. "Yes, we'll stay." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Elena spoke again. "You know, when I took this job, I was terrified. Single mother, low on options, desperate to provide for my daughter. I thought it would just be another job, another paycheck. I never imagined that you'd end up living in the guest house of a reformed workaholic who takes art lessons from your 3-year-old? Elena laughed. "Something like that." "Life is strange," Alexander mused. 6 months ago, I thought I had everything. Now I realize I had nothing. And a little girl with crayons showed me the difference." "She showed us both something," Elena corrected gently. "She showed me that it's okay to accept help, to let people in, to trust that not everyone will leave. She showed you that success isn't measured in dollars and board meetings. She showed us both how to be happy." The next morning, Alexander woke up early, not because of stress or insomnia, but because he heard Lily's laughter echoing from the garden. He looked out his bedroom window to see her chasing butterflies with Mr. Whiskers trailing behind her, Elena watching from a bench with a soft smile on her face. He dressed quickly and headed downstairs, stopping in the kitchen to grab the box he'd hidden in a cabinet. Then he went out to the garden, where Lily immediately ran to him, arms outstretched. "Uncle Alexander, did you see the butterflies? There's yellow ones and orange ones, and—" "I saw them," Alexander said, lifting her up and spinning her around, her laughter like music. "They're beautiful, just like you." He set her down and pulled out the box, handing it to her. "This is for you." Lily opened it carefully, gasping when she saw what was inside, a deluxe art set with paints and canvases and brushes of every size. But attached to it was a small plaque that read, "To Lily, my favorite artist, and the girl who taught me how to smile. Love, Uncle Alexander." "It's perfect," Lily breathed, hugging the box to her chest. Then she looked up at him with those wise eyes that saw too much for someone so young. "Uncle Alexander, are you happy now?" Alexander looked at Lily, at Elena, at the garden where butterflies danced in the morning light, at the mansion that had finally become a home. He thought about the changes he'd made, delegating at work, making time for what mattered, opening his heart to people he'd almost missed. "Yes, Lily," he said, kneeling down to her level. "Thanks to you, I'm very happy." "Good," Lily said seriously. "Because remember, you must smile every day now. That was the rule." "I remember," Alexander promised. "And I will. Every single day." As they walked back to the house together, Alexander, Elena, Lily, and Mr. Whiskers, the mansion that had once stood cold and empty now seemed to radiate warmth. Through the windows, someone passing by might have seen what looked like a family, a man who'd learned that wealth meant nothing without connection, a woman who'd found security and respect, and a child whose innocent wisdom had changed everything. And in the living room, framed on the wall in a place of honor, hung a piece of paper, slightly wrinkled, edges worn from being handled with love. On it, drawn in crayon with a child's unsteady hand, was a stick-figure man with a big smile, rosy cheeks, and a flower on his forehead. Underneath, in Lily's careful letters, were the words, "Uncle Alexander, happy face." It was, Alexander often thought when he looked at it, the most valuable thing he owned. Not because of any monetary worth, but because it represented the day his life truly began. The day a 3-year-old girl decided he needed to smile and had the courage, armed only with crayons, to make it happen. Some people collect art worth millions. Alexander Hart had learned to cherish something far more precious, the messy, chaotic, beautiful artwork of a child who'd loved him enough to cover his face in colors. And in doing so, she'd added color to his entire world.